So this week we have problem solving part 3, which is all about Charles' analysis and execution, initiation.
Analysis and direction, more than anything.
Of course. So, yeah, welcome. Charles, take over.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Great to see you again. Very good. What I'll do first is I'll just quickly run through what we've done so far. So the story so far, if you like. So what we looked at was, first of all, the objectives and the learning outcomes, and those were basically moving away from stale thinking habits like cognitive biases and all of those sorts of habits, which is always the first step in moving forward in any sort of form of change, really, particularly of this kind of change. Then we've looked at methods to define the problem and to define the challenge, and how you can actually sort of begin to dissect the problem and pull it apart. And as my cousin that I'm with at the moment and I were discussing the other day, that 90% of evaluating or finding solutions to any problem is actually just understanding the problem. That is the problem, understanding it. So, and then applying techniques to generate from that dissection, or from that deconstruction is probably a better word, to apply techniques to generate ideas, generative ideas, and talked a little bit about divergent thinking, and then we'll come back to convergent thinking, which is really where we're going to today. And then also, part and parcel of all of this, I guess, is to form a clearer picture of how you make your own decisions, how your own decision-making skills work. But the idea is to have a repeatable process, to have a process like a skeleton or a structure onto which you can overlay any kind of sort of process, problem solving, to actually sort of find ways in order to deconstruct and then reconstruct, and then to come up with generative ideas towards innovation as opposed to just creativity. And then, we hope that you then find confidence to actually share on how you work with those sort of innovative processes. One of the first things that we did, as I said, was looking at metacognition, thinking about thinking and how we seem to sort of think about almost everything else, like how we look, how we feel, how our bodies are, but we don't very often think about how our thinking works. But we do think about most other things, and that's one of the main things that we need to address. And also we need to address how that works in relation to other people as well, in terms of the thinking dynamics, and how best to build a team, how best to generate ideas in the context of building a team. So that's really the context, if you like, of problem solving, and we'll look at that. Then we went into common thinking errors, and I've split it down when we did it only into 3 main categories, that being assumptive thinking, reactive thinking, and selective thinking. Now there's thousands of other cognitive biases, as they're called, which affect how we think, which are quite natural, quite normal. And assumptive thinking, reactive thinking, and selective thinking are all quite natural, but they tend to steer and guide how we think and how we react to problems or deal with problems. And if you're aware of those cognitive biases, then you have the ability to actually move forward and to overcome the biases in order to find new creative solutions. There's a wonderful neuroscientist called Bo Lotto who's got this beautiful theory of, it's almost a concept of a sphere which encapsulates all your habits, all your assumptions, and everything you know and have knowledge of. The edge of that bubble is something that not he, but Stephen Johnson calls the creative skin, if you like. And beyond that is, we step beyond that into creativity once you leave behind some of your assumptions, but you can only do it on the possibilities of what is already in existence. So that's why there are no huge leaps. Most leaps take place on the basis of what we already know by associating, and we'll come to sort of how that works a little bit later again. Then once we'd sort of just had a quick look at cognitive biases and thinking errors. We looked at the 5 components, and the 5 components, which no doubt you all noted down, is analysis, ideation, reasoning, analysis, and then direction. And that basically is the process for innovation, particularly an applied innovation process, as opposed to just thinking up an idea. Although all ideas that eventually become innovations do go through that process. We looked at generative thinking, beginning to sort of build ideas, and there was quite a lot about generative thinking, and that's what we call divergent thinking, where you start to spread outwards rather than confining yourself to coming back in. At that point, we came into basically brainstorming and how it works and how it works best. We spoke about the individual, that all good brainstorming should start with the individual first, generating ideas, then coming into smaller groups, and then coming into larger groups, rather than, as most people, I think, tend to think that brainstorming is, let's get around a table, let's just shoot ideas around and see what we come up with, and then that's what we'll do. It doesn't really work that way. And I like to think of it as a metaphor of sort of having bricks, building a wall, and then building a cathedral or a building. So you need the little bricks first, and then you need to combine the little bricks into walls, into combinations of small groups, and then that moves forward into larger groups, and then you begin to sort of see the whole structure of what you're trying to build.
And
the next thing, sorry.
Okay, the thing that you mentioned last time that I thought was really important about the brainstorming, about doing it individually, is that if you do it all together, it seems like the social dynamics would get in the way of sharing your ideas. Whereas if you did it individually, I see as myself, it's like, if I do it individually, I come up with my own ideas. I'm probably more clear on the ideas to describe them to a group when I present them, instead of kind of getting lost in the shuffle of a big brainstorming session.
One of the big problems, I think, is in a lot of companies, they will say, right, well, let's brainstorm this and let's do this. What you have then is you have awkward power dynamics, you have awkward socializations, you have people who will not contribute because they don't want to be singled out, they certainly don't want to be blamed. In those sort of cases, that's actually one of the things that by starting with individuals, then creating groups, and the creation of the smaller groups is one of the key factors that then goes towards the bigger groups, then should begin to undermine that problem of the power dynamics that exist. That's why also, I mean, talking about space then, which is one of the other things we spoke about, is that obviously, for the same reasons, the same sort of democratic reasons, if you like, is that you need to have, or you don't need to have, but you should have a round table, because that then reduces this dynamic of somebody sitting at the head of the table, somebody directing, and somebody sitting at the foot of the table with their back to the door. I mean, these are all simple sort of rules that actually make a big difference. And we spoke about air and light, good refreshments, good healthy snacks as well, so that, and taking regular breaks is very, very, very important, particularly when you're in an ideation phase. And you need wall space. Very simple. Don't forget that you do need wall space. You need to put things up. You need to move things around. This is where Post-its have really come into their own, if not whiteboards and all sorts of things of that nature. And the other big thing that we're now sort of beginning to come up to analysis, and that's why I'm just sort of reviewing what we've done so far. It's being playful. You know, this is about being playful. There are no such thing as bad ideas. All ideas are valid ideas. It's not a question of good or bad. They're all valid ideas, but you need to be playful with them. You need to, you know, twist them around, reverse them, turn them upside down, see what happens if you throw them at the wall. You know, you need to play, because playfulness is very much a subset for creativity as well. There's a lovely acronym. I've got a few acronyms for you today, actually, but the one that we spoke about was SCAMPER, which is S is for substitute, so substituting ideas. These are just a technique developed by Mikhail Michalko. So S is for substitute, C is for combine, combining things together to create a new emergent property, adapting things. This is something that's taken up later by David Eagleman with his Bend It, Break It, Blend It that we'll come to in a moment. So S substitute, C combine, A is for adapt, M is for modify, so modify the idea or the thing or the problem, put to another use, so take whatever it is that you have, put it to another use, and the obvious example of this is the printing press, which took sort of wine pressing with printing and with paper and with books. Eliminate as well, eliminate whatever you can, cut off any fat, and reverse. Reversing is a very, very powerful technique. And there were a few others that we spoke about, lots of others sort of, and I think the point is of all the sort of creative games that you can play is to make up your own. But there's some great ones out there. I mean, the one that I really like is Lotus Blossom, where you start with a central idea, you then spread out into 8 petals. Each one of those is a sub theme for the central theme, being the central theme, and then you separate those 8 petals out, and then from there you then create 8 sub themes, and that then is a method of deconstructing a problem into basically 8 times 8, 64 subcategories and sub-themes, which then gives you the opportunity to look at what areas are important and what's not important. The other really important one in this sort of other techniques section was metaphorical thinking. I hold or harbour a little theory about metaphor, that actually it is the route to creative thinking. It's an associative method of thinking and combines 2 separate things like, I can't think of a metaphor suddenly, like, no, can't think of it. Anyway, it'll come to me. It's like a red, red rose, but that's not a metaphor, that's a simile. So it's basically combining 2 ideas that don't normally come together that then sort of create a new idea. And we looked at some of the creative thinking cards. There are loads of these and they're wonderful. I do actually collect quite a few of them. Just got a new one last week. And they're great ways to just sort of play with ideas, and some of them have got sort of 52 in cards. One of them's got 120 cards in it. And they're a great way just to sort of throw things out and to disrupt, because I think the creative process is quite a disruptive process, and it's meant to be, because otherwise you wouldn't be coming up with new ideas if you're not disrupting something. So that brings us to this week, which is basically mostly about analysis and then moves into direction. And I started just I got to the end of last week just to say that one of the key things I think that you mustn't remove from analysis is emotion. I gave you the quote from Antonio Damasio, which is, and I will repeat it if I may, is when emotion is entirely left out of the reasoning picture, as happens in certain neurological conditions, reason turns out to be even more flawed than when emotion plays bad tricks with our decisions. So, and Binet, who's one of the inventors of the IQ test, said emotional advertising is twice as efficient as rational-based advertising and delivers twice the profit. I think people underestimate and wrongly underestimate the amount of influence that emotion has on decision making. And the example is the Daniel Dennett example of the robot who's sitting out in the desert and has to defuse a bomb and will not defuse the bomb because he can't work out whether the price of tea in China or whether cars driving along the motorway is more important than diffusing a bomb, because he has no criteria to care about anything. So emotions basically are what they're indicators of what we care about, what means something to us. And they are incredibly important in all decision making. That's been proven time and time again. Antonio Damasio is the master of this because he's studied people who have had sort of either through damage or through deterioration of their brains, a problem with their emotional engagement with subjects. and they are incapable of deciding anything. So you need something that says, right, that's it, that's the decision. And the reason you do that is because you care about something. So don't underestimate the use of and the importance of emotion in decision making, because now we're coming to the point at which decisions have to be made. It gets much more practical now. So now we're moving towards the logic side of problem solving. There's a lot of tools that get used for this, but if you think of this as convergent thinking, this is where we're going to start honing down the basic principles that we've now, or the basic ideas that we've now generated. And if you remember, we said quantity way over quality, always. You will get the quality if you do the quantity. So this process is, the input of this process is all the ideas that you have, and now we're going to start honing them down. It's like mining for diamonds. You have to sort of start digging down deep. And there are three very powerful techniques for beginning the first process of honing things down, and it's in the sort process, sorting things out. One is what's called a head and heart analysis, another is a pros and cons analysis, and the other is what's called the force field analysis. Head and heart is very simple, very straightforward. You create, you put your ideas in the center, and then you have a head section and a heart section. It could be the other way around, of course. You get the heart on the left. And then you decide on that basis with each and every idea that you have on, you give them a score on the head, on the heart, and then you total up those scores, and then you see which ones come out the winners. And it's quite important to do this because then you have the emotional side and the logical side on the decision. So it isn't just one or the other, and it isn't somebody's power or force or persuasion or influence that is therefore creating the winner of the list. And we're not looking for winners, we're looking for feasible candidates to take forward.
And so does this go along with us? I just wanted to bring up, when we're talking about the head and the heart on, it's almost coming back to the emotional state that you were talking about.
Yeah.
Well, on making decisions. Like,
what was the question?
About when you're talking about using the tools and having the head and the heart section, we're also coming back to making decisions, not leaving out emotion. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's very easy, I think, to approach this part where you're now saying, right, what ideas are really sort of valid? And you say, right, I like this one, this one, this one. Or this one's going to be easy to make money out of, for instance. So what you want to do is you want to find the most optimal candidate. And you need to use both sides of that analysis in order to achieve that. And pros and cons works very much the same way. But again, you need to sort of have some criteria for looking at these things. And it's a very, very simple, very easy way to analyze or begin to analyze. Force field analysis is something slightly different, developed by a guy called Kurt Lewin in 1951. This looks at what are the driving forces and what are the resisting forces of an idea. So you will have probably by this time have got a reasonable field of candidates, in which case you then take, again, your two columns and you have your driving forces and your resting forces. So what actually drives this idea and what is resisting this idea? And you set those out in two columns, and then you challenge each one of those and see what can we do that can either bring it further up in score or down in score, or the other way on resisting, what can actually sort of reduce the resistance once you've established what resistance is. I've got a little example, let's say for an office location. So if you're, for instance, you're thinking of relocating the office, then on the one side, your driving force might be that the new lease is a great incentive. It's a great new lease. But on the other side, on the resisting forces, is it unsettles the whole of the team. The same thing again, it becomes closer to the client base, let's say.
but then the resisting force is the expense of moving an entire office to a new location. The same thing with reducing operating costs, planning required, tapping into new markets, disruption, so fresh start. And the idea is that you take each one of these and you've split them now into driving forces and resisting forces, and then to re-challenge them and try to assign new scores if you can alter what you've already analysed as being the driving or the resisting force and its value. So that's basically how force field analysis works, and it's also a very powerful way to look at the ideas you have. And by the time you've done this, you've already filtered to some extent, because to some extent your intuition will actually sort of give you some idea of where you want to go, but it shouldn't be the only method that you use. You then come to the big sorting process. You will have prepared a shortlist, let's say 3 to 6 ideas, and a great way then because you've got 6 great candidates, and the problem is then, how do you choose between them? And there's a whole set of categories that you could or should use. A lot of this is list work. A lot of this is very, very sort of cold, logical work. So, and a great way to do it is to filter things into their attributes. And those attributes could be something like practicality, differentiation, safety, fun, strategy, organizational, methodological. What do we need to actually make this happen? Innovation, is it really an innovation in the market? Is it worth pursuing in that sense? And then to gradually sort of hone it down. I always carry in my bag and show to the clients 3 basic categories. And I tell my clients, you can only have, I've got them on little cards. I say you can have any 2 of these cards, but you can't have 3. One is quick, one is good, and the other is expense or cost. And if you want quick and you want quality, then it's going to cost you. It's not going to be cheap. If you want cheap and you want quality, then it's not going to be quick because it will take time. So by playing with these 3 things, there are actually 3 fundamental sort of categories, or attributes, in order to look at your idea and see what you still need to add into it in order to make it happen. The other big thing I think about the sorting process is that at this stage it's very easy to become very dictatorial or defensive. And at that point, you must use positive judgment and positive language. And it becomes increasingly important as people now begin to champion their ideas. But the invigilator, the director, the person in charge of this process needs to keep things into positive judgment. So you can't say, that's fantastic, but how are we going to do this? You need to, and back to the same thing, is that there's no such thing as a bad idea. They're all just ideas. And whether a so-called bad idea sheds light normally on what might be a much better idea. So you need all those ideas. And the other thing I think is about language. Now, my cousin, who has actually left the room, is or was a scientist. And one of the fundamental sort of core beliefs in science is the use of skepticism. You must use skepticism, but it needs to be positive skepticism. So you need to challenge ideas. You need to test them, and you need to test them by challenging them. I suppose that goes back to the hero's journey, is that anything worthwhile has got to overcome certain challenges. Be it Ulysses or whoever it may be, they have to overcome the challenges in order to be valid.
And I think the other thing that we talked about earlier was just playing the devil's advocate, because then you can almost circumnavigate any kind of questions or any kind of hardships or any things that could come up. I think devil's advocate is a really tricky term because it can get incredibly negative. Yeah.
Skepticism, I think, is a better word to use, because as with all sort of theories, is that you need to put it out to the world, and then the world comes back with its skepticism, or skepticism can actually be very, very positive in sort of in moving theories forward. And in order to prove something, you need to prove that it is consistent and that it will succeed. So therefore, I think skepticism is the right way to do it. I mean, all scientific theories, which again, my cousin would tell me more than I know, all scientific theories have to go out to the world to be tested and peer checked. And they have to then check the mathematics, check the theory, and make sure that it is robust enough. And when it's gone through that process, then it becomes adopted. Then we get on to the next section, which is screening. So at this point, then you're sort of beginning to screen things, and this is where you're listing out your final sort of 2-3 candidates. You give each a rating, and then you do a feeling versus logic, which is very similar to head and heart, and see where your feelings lie and where your logic lies with the potential solution. So again, it's pros and cons, heads and hearts, and it's trying now to sort of bring it into sort of a realistic format. And you've now sort of got it down to 1, 2, or 3 ideas that you may have 3 because you want to split test things or try out various ideas, see which one goes forward. And the final part of this sort of segment, if you like, is really about selection. So your final selections, which then go under the scrutiny of feasibility, acceptability, and desirability. Feasibility obviously is, do we have the right resources for this? And resources become incredibly important in terms of being able to go forward, and resources may mean sort of financial resources, human resources, physical resources, market resources, marketing resources as well. Acceptability is really about, is it on mission? Is it consistent and congruent with our mission and what we want to achieve? And these are all roles that really the director or the person sort of guiding the process rather than steering actually has to take on board, particularly where it comes to our mission. And the final section is desirability. Is this something we want to do? It may be a great idea, but it's maybe not something we actually want to pursue. So that's the final sort of check. So then just a quick note really about direction, and then we'll talk a little bit about styles of leadership as well. So as I said before, no idea is, it's not an innovation until you make it happen, until you take action. And the other thing is that it has to be massive action. You have to be committed as well. And it has to be implemented, and ideas have to make positive change, I think, to become innovations. So there's this lovely sort of triangle between motivation, purpose, and belief, is that if you haven't got the belief in the product or in the idea or in the developed idea, then you won't have the purpose, and then you won't have the motivation. But if you have the belief, then you have purpose, because it gives you purpose, because it gives meaning, and then that allows motivation throughout. So that brings us to, how are we doing? Yeah, good. Leadership. Now, I've been completely bowled over by a short theory about 4 basic styles of leadership in conjunction with something called Above and Below the Line. And this comes from the Commitments of Conscious Leadership, which is a beautiful book, very, very, very concise. So I'm going to start by explaining a basic concept, which is that they have an above the line and a below the line. Above the line is where you are creative, you're conscious, you're involved, and you're invested in the problem or the management or the direction. And below the line is where we become defensive, where we take on other types of mentalities which are non-productive. So they split. Sorry, go on, Christina. You're muted, Christina.
Okay. When you're talking about, I love this, but above and below the line, and Charles just mentioned it's styles of leadership, but I want you to think about, everybody to think about it personally, because whether you're leading a group or you're thinking about it as yourself solving problems, you can either be proactive and above the line or defensive and reactive below the line. So when Charles is going over these 4 styles, think about it in your personal problem solving as well.
I think it's the key concept is this above and below the line. Yeah. It sounds ridiculously simple, but it is highly effective in terms of visualizing what they're talking about. So they have 4 basic styles. One is called to me, the other is called by me, through me, and as me. So if I go through those 4 styles, and it's important to say, I think, at this stage that according to the writers of the book, is that 95% of us spend 98% of our time below the line. But you do, from time to time, sort of move above the line. So to me is basically everything happens to me. So life happens to me. It's a victim mentality, and it's defensive. So things happen outside that affect me, and therefore I need to react to that, and I become defensive on that. And that becomes blaming and complaining. It wasn't my fault, or the market changed, or I don't know, the 2008 global recession happened. And so everything becomes external to yourself. So there's a duality, and that then is the external problem. And it's someone else is at fault, or someone is at fault. Now, it can be that you take on the problem yourself and you say, I am to blame. It's my fault, but then that becomes the victim mentality, basically. And someone else should fix this. So there is a separation between yourself and the things that cause the action. By me, which is the next stage. So if you think to me is where most of us live most of the time, which is below the line, then by me is where things begin to change. And I think it's worth also saying that we may at any time sort of flip from below the line to above the line, and that sort of transition happens very quickly and sometimes very short as well. So by me is I make life happen, which is taking responsibility. And as I say, these are styles of leadership. Once you take responsibility, then you become more of a creator. You have more appreciation. You're more in the moment. Problems are here to learn from. Now, this relates directly to Carol Dweck and her sort of analysis of mindset. That if you have an open learning mindset, you have more capability for creativity and for participation, and everything is whatever happens as the possibility of learning something from it. So it's not so much that even if you create a problem, so you can solve it, and it's always, what can I learn from this? Where can I move on from this? What value does this have? And it defines better your wants and desires. Which brings us to the third one, and this is the other thing to mention is I don't think these are hierarchical in that sense, that we move in and out of a lot of these, with the exception of as me, and I'll come to as me in a moment. So through me is this sense of sort of cooperating with life happening. So it's a sort of surrender to the way things are, but it's a creative involvement. So it's a co-creation. It's allowing, and this is what Christina and I would call, well, not just Christina and I, but many, many people would call a flow state. So this is where you reach a point a bit like a child, or a bit like when you're climbing, or maybe when you're skiing, or whatever it is that you're doing, where time recedes, you're completely and utterly in the moment, and you have a sense of a loss of time, or that time has no significance. And this is what's called a flow state, which which is what we all sort of aspire to, particularly athletes can get and do get and practice getting themselves into flow states, as does an artist, as does anybody who needs to focus and concentrate on one thing at one time, to the point that it consumes every single ounce of concentration. That makes the person experiencing it the source of meaning. So you're giving meaning, but you are a conduit for it. It's not you that's producing it. It is flowing through you. Now, that's slightly on the religious side, and that always frightens me a bit, because it used to be that, particularly with creativity, that people thought, oh, it's something external to me, and I'm just a conduit or a channel through which it happens. I personally don't believe that, but I do understand that sense of feeling that, it's almost happening without me doing anything. So that's the state of flow, really. And what wants to happen through me is the question that someone in a by me state would ask, in a through me state would ask. Finally, there's the as me state, and this really doesn't happen to very many people. It's very rare, I think, but it is a style of leadership, and this is life is me. So basically, this is a state of enlightenment, and I can only think in terms of sort of Gandhi or the Buddha or Martin Luther King or people of that sort of caliber, where everything is completely and utterly consistent, congruent, and everything is meshed together into one whole oneness, as it were. So there isn't really any sort of duality, no separation. But I think there are very, very, very few people who get into this state and who are capable of sustaining it.
Yeah, so I think that what we were talking about earlier is the enlightened leader, but it is, I think, even people as the as me state that are that conduit, or they're aligned with their goals, they're flowing through their day, they're being co-led through me and as me. Yeah. I think that they can kind of be working together a little bit. But well, right,
you do.
As me, there's a lot less people that are achieving that state.
I think also that you might get a flash or a moment of as me whilst working into through me.
Yeah.
But I think it's a very valid conception of styles of leadership. And if you combine that with the above the line, below the line, and the fact that we just sometimes sort of flip over the line and we're into it, we know what it means, we know what we're doing, we know where we're going, and yet sometimes then something happens that does happen outside of you, that then you suddenly feel that you are not responsible for this. Then you flip back below, you become defensive. It involves fear, it involves risk, and all of those things combine.
And it's interesting right now too, what we're dealing with really with the pandemic and with lockdowns, is that a lot of us who might be in the through me or even as me state, maybe not as me, but through me, can dip down into the to me and then have to come back to, okay, how do I come back and allow this to be created and flow and aligned?
I think what really resonates with me on this is the to me state of being, if you like, is very natural.
Yeah.
I mean, who doesn't sort of say, well, it wasn't my fault. I didn't make the banks collapse, or whatever, or I didn't make COVID. So I completely sort of understand that. And I think most of us do really genuinely spend most of our time within a to me state of mind. And I think, as I say, I think it's just, as with all of these things, they are categorizations, they're ways of conceiving things. But I think this is a very valid way of conceiving 4 styles of leadership. Maybe not the only 4 styles, but I think they cover most styles. And that combined with the above and below the line as well makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
So I'm going to move on because I've got a few more things to get through. Then we're talking about building teams, and we've already spoken about Edward de Bono's 6 hats, and we've talked about the 10 personas. So I'm not going to go into all of that again, and all those documents are still available on on the replays. But it is a case of continuous assessment. And now particularly we're talking about problem solving. So a problem is never really solved because the world outside changes. So therefore you have to readdress, you have to adapt, evolve and adjust constantly. So, you know, for me, that would be that Newton's theory of gravity stood for many, many centuries until someone came along and said, well, maybe the world has changed and we can understand more or differently about the world, and therefore the theory has to change. So I think that's true for any development of any kind, is that it will become static, it will become morbid if you don't adapt, if you don't evolve. And these are, you know, fundamental terms to creativity as well. If you don't adapt, if you don't evolve, and you don't adjust accordingly, which is the basic fundamental of feedback, then it will not progress and it will remain static. So, I mean, there must be millions of examples. Kodak is the one that I can think of, Kodak film and cameras, that did not see the whole of the digital sort of phenomena coming, and therefore were left behind, completely and utterly left behind. Same with Polaroid as well, although that's made a comeback, as they said. The other thing really, whilst still talking about sort of direction, leadership, is belief, is self-efficacy, is becoming effective. So you have to believe that you can do the task, obviously, because otherwise, why would you do it? And you can perhaps pretend yourself or fake till you make it, but you have to believe. And that then becomes the motivation for others. I think, I personally think that a director's role is to motivate others and to allow others to learn rather than to teach or to dictate. But that's my view on that. And that then, if you have that sort of belief, then it creates a certain amount of perseverance in the face of challenges as well. You need grit, is basically, I think, where we're going with this. Building confidence provides future outlook, and building solutions as well. So there's one sort of big acronym that I think most people are aware of that I'm going to give you, which is SMART, S-M-A-R-T. This is used so extensively in business, but I will go through it because it's great. It does work. So any sort of business plan, and now we're talking about the plan of action, the thing that you put to implement your ideas, has to be SMART. That being S equals specific, M equals measurable, A equals attainable, R is relevant, and T is timely. So if I just go back through some of those. So specific means that it needs to say where, what, where, when, how, and that's it. It must be specific to the goal and the resources required. Measurable is that there's no point in setting a goal and then not having any method of measuring each step along the way, that being either cost or how many or how much or what resources you need and how to apply those resources. Attainable, a target must be achievable. Now, I know that some people set incredibly high targets and goals, but if they get too high then and they're unattainable, then that will lead to disappointment. The same with too low. If they're too easily achievable, then you really haven't sort of set anything that challenges anyone. R, being relevant, is that, and this is about consistency and congruence as well, is that your goal should be consistent with your needs. So don't set goals just because you think you should. And I think most companies do this. They set goals because they think they have to set a mission, set a goal. Oh, this is what we want to do. If it isn't consistent with your beliefs, then it's unlikely that you're going to achieve it. I think that's the idea of time. And timely is basically setting dates, long-term, final outcome, where you want to get to, medium-term, the milestones that you hit along the way, and short-term is step by step. So you need to measure each step. Now there's a little stupid thing that I love, which is a great way with any to-do list and any plan and it's great for your journals, but particularly for your to-do list, is every day or every week, whenever you do your sort of list of things you need to do, break it into 3 segments: now, next, and soon. And then you put in the now column what you must do now, today. Next is, that's the thing that has to follow after you've done the thing that you've done, the thing that is urgent. And soon is sometime, nice to do, but doesn't have to be done immediately. And then, as with all plans, allocating resources, money, time, people, equipment, and skills, of course. The other thing I think that often gets forgotten in the implementation side of problem solving is actually allocating a communication plan. It's how people are going to interact and communicate with each other, which needs to be thought through. And then also to introduce people to changes before the change has actually happened, so that they're on board with the change. It also gives people sort of reason, meaning, passion, purpose, all those sorts of things. So it all works basically, and only works, on taking action, deliberate action, which is the same. I think if we go back to sort of deliberate practice, if I can, for a moment, you don't progress if you don't take deliberate practice or deliberate action, and that deliberate action has to be based on sort of feedback. Sometimes that's external feedback, and the ability to work on specific, honed down things. And I think there's no great time to ever implement any problem solving. Don't wait for perfect conditions, just do it. Get on with it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be done more than perfect. And you have to monitor progress. So then finally, and I'm right at the end of problem solving now, is review and celebrate. Every time you hit a milestone, celebrate, do something. Do something that indicates that you have achieved that milestone or that step or whatever it may be. And rinse and repeat. And that's pretty much it. So this was 3 sessions to go through problem solving. I'm developing at the moment a specific course. It is sort of more specifically geared towards corporation sort of problem solving techniques, which I hope to have done within about a month now. And we'll see where we get to with all of that, but I wish you all great luck. The notes and the outlines will all be published as usual with the replay. I hope I hope that's been supportive and helps you all. And there we are, bang on time.
I know, it's perfect. I just wanted to say a couple takeaways that I thought was really cool about all 3 of the courses that or all 3 of the webinars that you have done is it allowed me to think about brainstorming a little bit differently. Mm-hmm. Definitely no idea is a bad idea. And then really take into the head and heart approach, considering emotions, and really allowing people to voice their opinions and be positive about that. And then also thinking about above and below the line, whether it's happening to me or through me. Or as me. And I think just tapping into all of these subtle little things on a personal basis and then celebrating the victories as well when you do actually have deliberate practice, come up with that one thing and start to really come up with that innovation and delivery.
I think the other takeaway, if I could give anything to anybody, would be just muck around, play with it. Don't be too serious about it. You know, generating ideas should be and is fun. And it's something that, to be honest, we all used to do when we were kids. Yeah. And then we got taught not to do it. Yeah. We were told that disrupts things. Kids don't learn to walk by, well, they don't give up, basically. They do get it because they just keep going at it. And you just have to go at it and play. Make the rules. There are no rules, really. There's a skeletal structure, but there is no rules. You do it, but if you follow the process, without being a slave to the process, then I think, and we know from Open Genius and sort of other people who use this process, and as I said, we will be teaching it as well, is that it is proven, tested, it works. It's a very effective process, but you have to be playful with it and creative, of course.
And creative. Yes.
So that's it.
Thank you.
Next week.
Psychometrics.
Psychometrics, yes. So what we're going to do next week is slightly unusual for us in a way, is to look at the method called psychometrics, which is basically a method of measuring people's personality, which is used so extensively from IQ tests to Myers-Briggs to all sorts of tests, even into quizzes, dare I say it, and I have a quiz which uses it. So we'll have a look at how that works, and we'll have a look at it on the basis of the thinking and the theories of Carl Jung and a few other people as well. So, it should be good fun. That's really interesting, I think.
Yeah, it'll be great. I think we'll all be able to learn something, one, about ourselves and how, and also how other people view, view the world, and just gives you different aspects of everything.
I think, like many things, it's a method of categorization.
Yes.
And as a result, it is a way, a bit like to me, as me, by me, and through me. It's a method of breaking things down into chunks. So we'll have a look at that next week.
Right.
So,
thank you
everyone.
so much, everybody.
Be well.